Afternoon now, and a look at the world of Henry Dagg, composer, musician and craftsman, in anything that makes a noise.
The saw is the most recent instrument in my collection. I only started playing it a few years ago, and it came about entirely because the head of the BBC Music Department, David Byers, asked me to provide him with a version of a Bach fugue in any sound effects of my choice for a program he was doing about his tercentenary. And initially I chose a Jew's harp and a wine glass to do this fugue, and when I was scoring it I discovered the Jew's harp wasn't going to do very well for the tenor part, so I thought a bit and ended up with a car horn instead. And that meant going out and buying one because I wanted a good old horn. So in a sort of antique cum junk shop, I was telling a dealer what I wanted and what I was going to do with it, and he produced the perfect pair of horns for me and suggested that a saw made a good sound if you stroked it with a bow. So I picked up a bow in the same place and tried out one of my workshop saws, and after a lot of messing I got the one note that I needed to do the fugue. And some months after that I thought I might as well see if I could make a playable instrument out of it, since it had been done, God knows, for long enough. Back to the 1900s, 1920s, it was a very popular instrument. After a lot of searching, I found a new saw in a local hardware shop. They lent it out to me on approval to try it in a good acoustic, and I ended up buying it. I still have it. It's a very playable saw. And then, after quite a lot of practice, it was a very useful way of filling in spare time at work when there was nothing to do. I could retreat into a corner and practice there. My influences are largely a combination of the classical music, which was all pervading in the household I grew up in. We're a totally musical family, and the rock music, which I always veered towards when I was doing my own thing. What I was aiming at in Siren and Farron was to create a sort of portrait of a day in the life of the Northern Ireland farmer. So I set up a scene where the first thing you hear is the main tower siren going off at the base, calling the appliance out. You hear them getting into the machine, starting up, going out on the street. You hear the normal alternating air horns as they go out, and then as they get on, the percussion comes in. The percussion is all done on gunshot, so the theory is that the firemen drive through the streets blasting out this dismal tune while the terrorists are busy riddling them with bullets from either side of the street. It's a sort of spoof of the media's eye view of the terrorist scene here. Okay, can you give me a quick blast of either of them just to set the level? That's fine. The fire service were immensely helpful there. They drove me all the way out to Lisburn, where their maintenance depot is. They got hold of a bunch of air horns and picked out a good sounding one and then blew the hell out of it for a few minutes on end with a compressed air line while I recorded it. They picked up an old siren that was lying around and brought that back to Belfast, and we recorded that as well. And then all I had to do was actually compose the piece. So that was a matter of sitting down for a few hours and hammering out a good sort of no-nonsense, doleful tune that would seem appropriate. The only thing I had to cop out a bit on was the bass part, and I just used the bass guitar for that. I hadn't got the sort of no musical instrument ideals that I ended up with later in those days. I always had visions of it becoming a good video. I think it would make a nice video if the rock music industry doesn't consider it too much out of date now. It was 1982 I did it, so it's getting a little long in the tooth now. When I bought this house, I really wanted somewhere where I could undertake all the enterprises that really a place where I could execute any idea I had, because I do believe in seeing a project through no matter what sort of field it takes me in. So the projects I've taken on here have actually ended up taking me into all sorts of areas that I never started out working in, like glass etching and cellulose spraying, screen printing, and all sorts of things that I think may well come in useful in later years when I try and combine various art forms with music in different ways. Really, it's not so much a house to live in as a house to work in. It's just a series of workshops. With the emphasis very much on music, because all the workshops are very much occupied in doing work that ultimately ends up in the service of whatever musical project I have on. I've built a lot of things which have been instrumental, literally speaking, in my music. of the first things I wanted to tackle was the replacement of the kitchen, which was a primitive hole, obviously hadn't changed since the house was built. And you could see that the Victorians felt that the servants just didn't merit the same sort of attention to detail and ornate design that they put into the rest of the house. So I took as my model the front door, which is quite a splendid piece of opulent moulding and etched glass. And I've based the base units on the bottom half of the door, and the wall units consist of a terrace of doors, each with two round-headed moulded panels with etched glass panels. So that meant I had to get into glass etching, whether I wanted to or not. My approach to composing is that I do try hard to get a good, accessible tune, but my priority is always towards an interesting harmony line. And what I try to do is walk a tightrope between what's predictable and what you simply can't get away with. In my initial compositions, the priority was always with the harmony, often to the detriment of the tune, which was sort of overlaid afterwards and ended up quite clumsy at times. These days I try and work the two in together so that if the tune is really unhappy, then I modify the harmony so that it can go in a better direction. But I see composition as a series of decisions which have to be taken at every chord. There's a number of options, a huge number of options, and I have to try and find one that doesn't sound banal, if I can help it, but doesn't actually sound wrong either. So it's pretty hard work, like anything else. It's not a process I enjoy all that much, but if it turns out a good job, I get quite a lot of satisfaction out of it. This piece, Fanfare for the Bogeyman, is a sort of tone poem of a train journey. Since I'd already done a number of pieces using sound effects as the basic instruments, I set about composing a piece which would exploit the sound of the air horn, which is its main musical feature, to the full. So I've written it in the form of a sort of a fanfare, simply because the air horn could be compared to a trumpet of a sort. It's not unlike a trumpet. It's quite a musical sound. To get the basic rhythm of the tracks, I found, having listened to a number of train journeys, that you generally get an alternation between two time signatures from the tracks, 9/8, like this, and 6/8, depending on what way the track joints are orientated. Another feature I built into this was a sort of simulated Doppler effect. The air horns, which performed the harmony lines, all four of them, were treated in such a way that they shot from one side to the other as the chord changed, generally downward. So you'd have something like this. The chord would move en masse down the semitone, and the horns would move from left to right and sort of go meow, as in the Doppler effect. And that feature's repeated throughout the piece. I found when I actually got a mic stuck out the window to record the wheels on the track that Actually, the clicks are a very small part of the sound, and most of it is rumble and hiss from the bearings of the bogies. And there were very few usable clicks in the end. I listened to about 2 hours of track noise and got 20 sets of clicks that I could use. So those ones I rescued and cut them very tightly and used them again and again on a long loop. So that I got, you got the feel of continually changing track, but in fact it was just the same 20 clicks going round and round. Those I dealt with in Northern Ireland Radio were extremely helpful. I remember when I was recording the locomotive air horn, I went to the maintenance depot, and a very enterprising chap called Jackie Kitchen, I think, put me on an old signalway gantry right above the train and drove the loco to the exact point where I needed to record it, so that the horn was virtually opposite me. And blasted their horns to pieces for me for several minutes on end, so that I could get a long enough stretch of continuous horn to do what I needed to do with it, because some of the notes in this piece are extremely long, and a lot of them are a lot higher than they were originally recorded, which means that they have to be longer in the first place. So I imagine anybody who lives in that vicinity would remember that time to this day. The only other element I needed for the piece was the bass. Now, trains are a bit short on bass sounds that are useful, so I had to simply imagine what would be a good sound, and I built a thing I call a wire bass. It's a very crude device, just stretches several bits of wire 7 feet long, and I hit them and slide pickups to various different positions. I found there's an infinite variety of different sounds I could get from combining the two pickups. We're now in the woodworking shop, which is one of the first things I built when I bought the house. First of all, because I had these long-term plans to build musical instruments, but also because quite an early decision was to try and replace the god-awful kitchen I was left with something a bit more in the style of the Victorians. I discovered fairly early on that required quite a lot of skills, and my way out of acquiring skills is to build machinery to do the work for me. Most of these machines have been built up here simply because it wouldn't be practical to get heavy cast iron industrial machinery up here on the second floor. Saw bench, bench grinder, drilling machine, that's a factory job, the spindle moulder, and that did most of the door jointing. That's all done. The woodwork has mainly been done on these units. It's now at the finishing stage, and that's being done in a room next door here. Here's one of the bass unit doors. It's a bit of an oddball because that actually goes in the corner, but most of them are double panel, just like the front door. It's a cellulose finish. That's about halfway through. It's got to go through a lot of polishing and stuff. These are trolleys, which are also part of the base units. They pull right out onto the floor. This is a cooker hood, taking up a lot too much space in here. These are finished doors from the units themselves, and very soon now they'll all be fitted into the units. The Kitchen Symphony is one of my better known pieces, not that that's saying much. And it came about because a radio producer some years ago who was working on a series of programs about food, he wanted to end his series with something of a flourish. So he asked me if I could whip him up something interesting out of kitchen sounds. So I had to think a bit about that before I thought it was going to be possible at all, because in fact if you look around the kitchen, most of the sounds you get there are percussive. They don't carry any musical pitch. They don't carry, not easy to make tunes out of them. It meant really stretching things a little. Most of what I use, in fact, is centered around bottles and glasses, popping corks and using wine glass rims and hitting them and that sort of thing. So I took it on in the end because I thought it would be a useful thing to have done at some stage. The first thing I had to do, of course, was to write a tune, because I believe quite strongly in having tunes, no matter what sort of sounds you use to make the final result. I set about making a tune with lots of holes in it so that I could drop recognizable percussive sounds into it, I have scales clatter, pan filling, meat mace, carrot scrape, all this sort of thing. They're useful things to drop in. The process is simply a matter of recording a good specimen of the sound. If it's a musical sound, you speed it up to make it higher pitched and slow it down to make it lower pitched. Choose your note according to the score. Measure it on the calibrated Edison block so that you've got the right number of beats in each note. At the end of all that, you've got a single track. You do it for all the tracks. Then they all have to be played together on 4 tape recorders, all of which you hope will stay in step for the duration of the piece you're recording in. Problems. I think, in terms of recording, one of the biggest problems was recording the tapped wine glass. Unless you hit it with incredible delicacy, you get a great whump on the mic. It's a matter of luck, really, getting a nice sound out of it. Typically, you can spend a couple of hours just getting one good sound, and that's why this sort of thing takes so long. I mean, the Kitchen Symphony was about 3 months of work. I don't use any real sound unless it's impossible to get any other way. I mean, if I could use synthesizers to do this, I'd probably do it. Samplers have just, in recent years, become almost affordable, and I'm just waiting for the day when I can get a sampler which will take over all this work. But unfortunately, so much memory space is needed for this sort of work I do normally that it's just not affordable for me yet. And it'll have to wait until we can buy a Fairlight in the supermarket before I can completely throw away the tape system. One of the first stages of glass etching is to cut the pattern out of a sheet of lead foil that you've stuck to the glass, so that when you immerse the whole surface in hydrochloric acid, the exposed areas then become etched to a slightly lower level than the rest of the surface. However, in the case of the glass panels in my kitchen doors, the details in my designs are so minute that the only way I could see of executing them anyway decently was to use a screen printing process, which allows me to optically transfer the design to a screen stencil and then simply print an etch-resisting ink onto the glass. And from there on, it resembles the traditional technique. You build a wall of margarine around the glass to retain the acid. You pour it in and wait an hour or so for the stuff to eat its way through. While I was trying to get to grips with all this, I was called by the producer of the Food and Drink program. He'd heard my Kitchen Symphony, and so he ended up with an arrangement of Food Glorious Food from Oliver. This is the room I've earmarked as a bakery for doing my biscuit modelling in. But at the moment it's having to store all sorts of bits and pieces of various projects around the house. Right here I've got one of the more or less assembled wall units for the kitchen. It's waiting for the kitchen area itself to be ready. And it will have panels and shelves in here it'll look more like a Welsh dresser. The doors, as designed, they slide up like sash windows. The idea being that you don't bang your head on them and they don't cast shadows in the way that normal kitchen doors do. There's more of the same in here. This is where I've had to install or assemble the carcasses of the base units of the kitchen. And they don't look very complete, but there's not that much more to go in. All the innards have been made, the doors have to be secured, tiles have been laid on. And after that, I'm hoping I'll be able to get on with turning this place into the main area for the music studio. This is the engineering workshop. I've fitted it out with everything I can to help me make up any of the machines I feel I need to have for some particular job. Some machines just for fun. So I've got a couple of lathes for doing the main engineering work. I've also had to take on the glass etching in here. So that's laid out there. The electronics is one of the things I've been doing for longest, although not so much in recent years. And I'm fixing up at the moment a little souvenir from my school days, which was a sort of portable electronic music studio. I was quite heavily into musique concrète in those days, and that was a bit of fun for that. This is really a filing cabinet for the sort of junk that I couldn't resist when it sort of cropped up. I can never turn down a good motor. It's the starting point for so many of the things I make. And although I don't have time to realize the ideas, they're involved with an awful lot of things I want to do. Anything that makes a noise has to have a place here. The room is crammed with tape recorders of various sorts. These are just the nude chassis of various ones I've picked up out of skips or have been bequeathed to me. Old cast iron master switches. I think they've got great style and they're nicely made, much nicer than the modern ones. And I've installed them in all the areas where I've got machinery, the workshops and the music room. They're all switched off at the end of the day with a big clunk. In theory, they're all very useful. Watch your 2-bait. Now, this is the first piano I ever bought. It turned out a dismal disappointment, but since I bought it with the house, I didn't lose that much. It was such a bad piano, I had to do a great deal of work on it, but I think you'll find its performance immeasurably improved. Anything you'd like before we go? You sure? This is another old piano that somebody tried to saw in half, and then they dumped it in an entry where I found it, and I've brought it back here and used it for occasional sound sources for music and radio plays and things. It's a very useful thing to have. This is a super caricature of the sort of thing I do all the time here. Not all of it's entirely literal, but it got exactly the spirit of the place. Done by a very good friend of mine, Ian Knox. And this is the sort of place he was getting at. This is the music room, which at the moment is so cluttered I can hardly do anything properly in it, but that'll soon be solved when the new studio area goes in, and it'll suck all the electronic gear, all the keyboards and the tape machine and everything. All that stuff will be done upstairs, so that'll leave the place free for the huge acoustic instruments that have to stay here. The latest engineering project is a sort of purpose-built mobile stage for busking. The sort of music I play on the saw really needs an accompaniment, and ideally I'd like a live pianist. But since pianos are kind of awkward to shift around on the street, the best I can normally do is to have a backing track on tape. Now, even the sort of tape recorder I need is quite a cumbersome thing, and when you add to that the stool and the saw and the case and everything, it all becomes quite a load. So my present plan is to build everything I need onto a tricycle, which should have a number of advantages over the old bike I used to carry everything on, which had a tendency to keel over under the load. For one thing, the sound system can be completely built in, where before I used to have to spend about 15 minutes setting the thing up. Also, I can use much bigger speakers, which gives me a better quality of sound on the backing track, And an added bonus is that I can fit a canopy, which will keep the worst of the rain off if I'm playing in an exposed area. I've gone about as over the top on the colour scheme as I can, really to try and create a carnival atmosphere in a city centre whose climate isn't always the most cheerful. And the Saw itself actually belongs to an era of circuses and carnivals, and looks best in that setting. In fact, I think the best use you can put the Saw to, apart from actually cutting wood, is to use it for busking, because a lot of its appeal is visual, and these days it's so rare a sight that people are entertained no matter what sort of horrible noise you're making on it. Apart from the lack of space, which I'm now suffering from, thanks to the enormous number of facilities here, I'm more or less set up to do the sort of work I want to do, and all I need is the time to do it, because in effect I'm trying to live several lives simultaneously. Having to do a job at the same time as all the things I do here is extremely difficult, and it leaves me sitting around in a welter of half-finished projects all the time, which is very frustrating. I'd like to see a welter of finished projects, ideally, so that I can be getting on with the things I actually want to do. And my real ambition is to find a way of making my music pay its way, so that I can devote the time I think it deserves to doing that, and the various other things that I want to do associated with it.